Okay, so in this installment, what I'm going to do is go through the continent of Asia, talking about the countries and things that I have heard come up in Quizbowl frequently, just a way, hopefully, by which you can orient yourself if you are responsible for this section of the world, which I divide up into 4 sections, and hopefully be a springboard upon which you can now start to dive in and learn all the various different facets of your country, from geography to maybe a little bit of politics and history, to also the artists and musicians and authors that might perhaps come from it. So in a quick overview, you have this part of the country known to us as the Middle East. We get that term because when it comes to the Romans, they referred to, since this was to their near east, this was their Middle East, and then, of course, you have the Far East beyond that. And so a lot of importance has been given to the Middle East in the last 75, 80 years due to, obviously, the developments after World War II, with the establishment of Israel as a Jewish state and like. You have, obviously, the central steppes. That would be the steppes of Asia, Steppes, that is all along here. And of course, up here you have Siberia in the cold, desolate region, not populated that much. I'm not going to be talking about Russia when it comes to Asia. I'm going to talk about Russia when it comes to Europe, because of, obviously, all of the stuff that centers around the eastern part. You have the Ural Mountains dividing, obviously, Europe from Russia. And then, of course, you have Southern Asia, which includes India, Pakistan, and the other countries that are down here. And then you have East Asia, which is going to be that of China, Southeast Asia, down into, obviously, Indonesia and the like. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start over here in this part of the world. So there you have it, what we call or refer to very often as, indeed, the Middle East. So you have the country of Turkey, which gained its independence in the 20th century under Kemal Ataturk. And he, of course, established the capital here at Ankara, not at what you can see not listed here, which is Constantinople, because the vast majority of Istanbul, now known as Istanbul, not Constantinople, is on the European side. In Turkey, you have Mount Ararat, which is supposedly where Noah's Ark came to rest, obviously, as well. Moving on. By the way, Turkey has been in the news. Its ruler currently is Erdogan. I forget how you pronounce his first name, Recep or something like that, but Erdogan, who is a somewhat autocratic fellow, consolidating power in Turkey now. And they, of course, have a complex relationship with other places, including NATO, to which they belong, and, of course, Syria, where the horrible civil war has been raging for quite a bit of time. Before we go directly into this part that you can see is boxed in, we'll go to the expanded. We will talk about Georgia rather briefly. Georgia has, of course, its capital at Tbilisi, and it is all along the Caucasus Mountains, and it was invaded about 10, 15 years ago by Russia into its South Ossetia region. So Georgia has South Ossetia. You have Armenia, which at the end of World War I experienced the Armenian genocide, as, of course, the purveyors of which, for those that are inclined to call it the Armenian genocide, that would be Turkey. But there's a big thing for the last over 100 years of Turkey denying that it was an actual genocide of Armenians, and instead said that it was just the chaos of the collapse of World War I. But there you can have Armenia with its capital at Yerevan. But it was a genocide of some sort, whether you can directly blame Turkey or not. You have all along the Caspian Sea, of course, these countries that are here. But before we get into them, I'm going to then go to the boxed-in part and talk about that incredibly important section of the Middle East. And so there it is. So here you have Syria. Syria has been engulfed in a horrible civil war. It is dominated by an ethno-religious group called Alawites, the ruler of which is the al-Assad family. Hafez al-Assad was the ruler of Syria in the last part of the 20th century. And then moving into the 21st century, you have his son Bashir al-Assad, who has horrifically cramped down on the Syrian civil war, which grew out of the Arab Spring that we talked about previously in the Africa section of these videos. To the west of Syria, you have, of course, Cyprus, which has its capital Nicosia, but it is currently Cyprus under a kind of power struggle and tug of war between Turkey and Greece as to who actually controls it. And I think Cyprus is where the green line exists that demarcates the area for each. But let's go back to Syria for just a second. In its horrible civil war, you have Aleppo, which of course is a center of said civil war, and Damascus is its capital. Damascus is known for several things. One, a fellow named Saul, who was a Roman citizen, who got his jollies by torturing and killing Christians, had a moment on the road to Damascus, whereupon he converted and became Paul, who, of course, was that tireless missionary spreading Christianity in its very earliest days. Damascus also became a center of steel production in the medieval period, and so it was known for that. So it's an incredibly ancient place. So if you include this area here of northern Iraq, Syria, and a part of Lebanon, you have what is known as the Levant, which, about 7-8 years ago now, this is being made in 2023, you had the rise of a caliphate, so they called themselves. They used the instability of the Syrian civil war, because it's hard when the war is going on for a government that is as tenuous as Damascus to have utter control of its northern part. But nevertheless, a quasi-independent state called ISIL, or ISIS, which is the Islamic State in the Levant, which is what this area was called because it is to the east, the rising Levant, where the sun would be for those that were in the classical world of Greece and Rome, or ISIS, and that would be the Islamic State in Syria. So Levant, ISIL perhaps is a little bit more accurate, but there it is with Syria. So we move on to the country of Lebanon. Beirut used to be known as like the Paris of the Middle East, but starting in the late 70s and early 1980s, there was racked, I say, by a civil war, and Beirut just was absolutely demolished in the 1980s. Lebanon has on its flag the cedars of Lebanon, but at any rate, it still has its issues. It is dominated, is Lebanon, by Hezbollah, a political group, I suppose, but it's more than just a political group that one could have. So let's talk about the most important development, one of the most important developments following World War II, and that was the creation of a Jewish state, which you can see here is Israel. Israel's capital is that of Jerusalem. However, most of the countries of the world do not have their embassies in Jerusalem. Instead, the largest airport, Tel Aviv, where you can find in Tel Aviv the great airport named after the first prime minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion. The story goes that it originally was offered to Albert Einstein, but he declined. And so then David Ben-Gurion is incredibly essential to learn the history of Israel and its interaction with its hostile neighbors, which of course does not want it there, because to carve out Israel, you had to take territory away from the Palestinians. There you have the West Bank. It's so called the West Bank because it is the west bank of the Jordan River, which you can find is flowing right here, separating the West Bank and parts of Israel from Jordan. Just this past couple of days, and this is being made on July 5th, 2023, there was an incursion into the West Bank by the Israelis. And so this struggle between the Palestinians and the Israelis has been a just thorn in the side of peace and stability and the like for just so long. And there's a long list of various different incredibly important prime ministers of Israel to know, as well as many of these. You have the 6-Day War in the 1960s. You have obviously Golda Meir in the 1970s, and just so much that I can't go into the details of that you need to know because it would just take too long. And of course, you have here the Sinai, which was gained by Israel in the Six-Day War. And down here at the bottom is a clue that comes up. It's called Sheikh al-Sharm, or Sharm el-Sheikh. I think it's Sharm el-Sheikh, which is a kind of a resort down here on the Sinai. So something to hopefully remember. And then you have the two arms of the Red Sea going up into the Suez Canal. Right to the east of Israel and the West Bank is Jordan, and there you have Amman. For a long time in the 20th century, it was ruled over by the king known as King Hussein, different than the ruler of Iraq, but King Hussein. And also you have in Jordan a place called Petra, which is an archaeological site in which a city is essentially carved into rock, as it were. But lots and lots of problems and instability and all sorts of things going on to the nature of Israel and the Palestinians, and the treatment of the Palestinians by the Israelis, and the treatment of the Israelis by the Palestinians, and so forth and so on. But let's move on in the interest of time. So if we then go to the south of Jordan and Israel, you will find the country of Saudi Arabia, which is ruled from Riyadh by the Saud family. The king of Saudi Arabia is old, and so therefore the de facto ruler is MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, who of course is responsible for the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, a horrific event in which his agents, the agents of Saudi Arabia, killed this journalist in a embassy, in a Saudi embassy, and it's been in the news for the last several years and deserves to be in it. But at any rate, of course, in Saudi Arabia, will you find the city of Mecca, that city where all Muslims are required at one point as a part of the Hajj to travel. And there you can find the Kaaba, or the Black Stone. There's then the Red Sea, and below then you have Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Oman. Yemen's capital is Sana'a, and it is here where a quasi-civil war is going on between people known as the Houthi rebels, which are of course aided by Iran, and then of course the Yemeni government, which is aided by Saudi Arabia. The other great issue in the Middle East, outside of Israel and its existence and the Palestinian question, is the all-proxy war constantly going on between Saudi Arabia and Iran for domination of influence. And it, in many ways, comes down to religion. Saudi Arabia and the other Arab states are dominated by the version of Islam known as Sunni. They are Sunni, whereas the Iranians are Shiites, and that fundamental difference really is a problem, as it were. We move over to Oman, and here you can see Gulf of Oman with its capital of Muscat, as it's there. So we then zoom in into the Persian Gulf. Now, this strait right here between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman is called the Strait of Hormuz. And it is at that strait that it is so incredibly important because, as we all know, so much oil production is created in this area of the world that that oil comes to the rest of the world through that strait. And so Iran has quite a bit of leverage and influence of being able to blockade that Strait of Hormuz if indeed things are deemed so by them. You have the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, with its capital of Abu Dhabi. And then, of course, you have Qatar, which hosted the most recent World Cup with its capital at Doha. And you have Bahrain with its capital at Manama. Now, before we move on with that, we don't see on here Dubai, but that is important to know as well. I think Dubai is located right along in here, in which in Dubai you will find the Burj Khalifa, which is the tallest building in the world, as well as all kinds of various different developments, including the creation of islands that they actually made off of their coast, including some in the shape of palm trees, which is a very common clue. Now, let's then move here to Iraq and Iran. So right south of Iraq, you have Kuwait with its capital of Kuwait City. In the 1990s, it was Kuwait, by Iraq at the time, led by Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein in the last half of the 20th century was an absolutely dominating figure and ruler of Iraq as an absolutely brutal dictator. He had, earlier in the 1980s, actually used chemical warfare against the people who live in the north of Iraq, known as the Kurds. Sometimes this whole area could be known as Kurdistan, as it were. But nevertheless, he had gassed those Kurds, who had also come under the torture and killings by ISIS, or ISIL if you would like. And through the heart of Iraq are the two incredibly important rivers, the Tigris, which flows through Baghdad, and the Euphrates. This area, which is the birthplace in many ways of civilization, is known as Mesopotamia, and that's where all kinds of various civilizations did spring up. In the 1980s, there was a war carried out between Iraq and Iran, and so there is in many ways no love lost between the two because, and I hopefully am getting this right, Saddam Hussein was a Sunni. He was of the Ba'ath Party, B-A-A-T-H, which is a Syrian party, but brought into Iraq, and Saddam Hussein, who of course was toppled in the second Gulf War. The first Gulf War was about the liberation of Kuwait. The second one, following 9/11, 2001, was about the toppling of the government that is there. But that is Iraq. There could be many, many more things that I can say about it, but again, we want to try and get this done in the interest of some sort of time. We move on to the huge country of Iran, and you have the Zagros Mountains. Those mountains are very often a clue in power or right out of power, indicating Iran is your answer line. The capital is Tehran, and it is the home of the Shah, who, Pahlavi was his name, was overthrown in the 1979 Islamic Revolution. But before that, you had the White Revolution. And the White Revolution before that was all about trying to get women some rights and that sort of thing. More than that, actually, but nevertheless, a way to remember it. In 1979, you had the Islamic Revolution led by the Ayatollah Khomeini. And at that point, the relationship between Iran and the United States really deteriorated. The embassy for the U.S. was, of course, ransacked, and many hostages were taken. And that is why you have the Iran hostage crisis, which dominated President Carter's last days of administration. They were released upon the election or swearing in, I forget which one, but as soon as Ronald Reagan came to power, they were brought back in. But nevertheless, Iran, modern-day Persia, this is the center of the Persian Empire, and so Iran is indeed modern-day Persia. So let's then go and talk about the Caspian Sea. Caspian Sea, which is where the Volga River, the longest river of Europe, but it is the river in Russia that you can see rolling into it. And all around the Caspian, you have a lot of oil sort of production. You have the stans, as it were, and that would be, of course, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and so forth and so on. But let's go through them rather quickly, starting over here with Azerbaijan, with its capital of Baku, then going across the Caspian Sea, a former part of the Soviet Union is Kazakhstan, with its capital of Astana. And it's somewhere in here in the middle. I don't remember where exactly, but that's the place from which the Soviet Union launched all of its space missions. And so that is the modern country in which that was it. Kazakhstan has, of course, the location, at least the northern part of it, of the Aral Sea, an incredibly important sea to be familiar with. Go and look that up on Wikipedia so that you can become somewhat familiar. And Lake Balkhash, that is right here. I'm mispronouncing it definitely, but oh well. So moving on then, you have Uzbekistan, that is located right here. You have at the capital, Tashkent. You have Turkmenistan, which you can find Ashgabat, that is there. And then, of course, Kyrgyzstan with capital Bishkek, and Tajikistan with capital Dushanbe. I don't know much about them, but somewhere up here in one of these places, I figured which one it is, but there is the, well, it's like the entrance to the underworld. It's this gas mine that's now a hole that's constantly been burning for the last Lord knows how long, but something definitely to look up. All right, so let's then move on now to Afghanistan. Afghanistan was involved with a Soviet invasion by the USSR in the 1980s, starting in 1979, I want to think. And there was a group called the Mujahideen, which were the resistors to said invasion. Ultimately, the Soviet invasion was unsuccessful, and that invasion, however, then gave rise to a person from Saudi Arabia in the name of Osama bin Laden to essentially set up camp in Afghanistan and develop the Al-Qaeda network of terrorists, which eventually led, obviously, to the 9/11 2001 bombings, or not bombings, but the plane crashing into the World Trade Center, leading almost immediately into the invasion of Afghanistan, which for 20 years was a war driving out the people who were ruling over Afghanistan, the Taliban, who were brutal on women in their rather narrow view and interpretation of Islam. But they took back power in Kabul when just recently, within the last 3 years during the Biden administration, the United States made the decision to finally pull out of Afghanistan with all of our troops. And sweeping back in were, of course, the Taliban with its harsh treatment of its women and like. So let's now talk about Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. As we all know, India had been a crown jewel in the British Empire, and the rule over India at that time was known as the Raj. I could spend so much time just talking about India and its importance. It's a rather ancient place. Its religions are important, but in the interest of time, we just have to make somewhat of a quick go of it. So when it comes to rivers, you need to be familiar with the Indus River. That is that river of Pakistan that gave rise to, of course, the Indus River Valley civilization with Mohenjo-Daro and the like. Then over here on the right-hand part, flowing through Bangladesh, you have the Ganges River, which is a holy river for the Indians themselves. The capital of India is New Delhi, that you can see here. New Delhi is not the same as Delhi that you can see, but it contains the cities of Lahore, the city of Mumbai, which used to be known as Bombay, Bangalore, that you can see down here, Madras, which is there, now known as Chennai, and so forth and so on. Mumbai is where you have the Bollywood industry, which is the Indian movie-making industry that just really pumps out all kinds of movies. And then, of course, over here with Kolkata. And again, I could go into talking about the Black Hole of Kolkata and the Sepoy Rebellion during the time of colonialism, but in the interest of time, we just do not have it. But at any rate, in Pakistan, it has a capital of Islamabad that you can see right here. And moving on down further to the south, you have the city of, but the island country of Sri Lanka. So its capital is Colombo, but it looks like Sri, and I'm not going to even try to pronounce that, might be an alternative capital. It is separated from India by the Palk Strait. Here you will have a group called the Tamils, and you will also find it here, and it is a group known as the Tamil Tigers associated with India. So go look up about them and find out as well. The Sinhalese people are those that live on Sri Lanka, which is this island country right to the south. So you have to the left of, or I should say west of India, the Arabian Sea, and to the right, the Bay of Bengal, which includes Bangladesh. Now, upon the separation or the independence in 1948 of India, you had then the separation of Pakistan and East Pakistan, which is now going to be known as Bangladesh. The great novel Midnight's Children is a winner of the Booker Prize by the novelist Salman Rushdie, sorry about the pause, and it describes events that take place in this partitioning and resultant of the India independence and then the creation of Pakistan, whose first prime minister is known as Jinnah. And over here, India is Jawaharlal Nehru, who, of course, gives the Tryst with Destiny speech, and his daughter, Indira Gandhi, who was, of course, assassinated at the Amritsar temple by some Sikhists who found fault with her. Go and look all of that stuff up. It is absolutely important to know. And I recently learned that upon his landing in Paris, Charles Lindbergh, 100,000 people were there, including Nehru and his daughter Indira Gandhi, which is kind of wild. But Indira Gandhi is the, of course, Prime Minister of India in the late 1970s, and I think she was assassinated in 1984. Pakistan and India have a huge problem due to a disputed region up here called Kashmir that they are constantly fighting over about, and they are great rivals, and a worrisome set of rivals because they both have nuclear weapons. They're one of only a handful of countries that have access to it. You also have another important river of this area of the world called the Brahmaputra. And again, you got to know these Asian rivers. It will most likely be included with them. The Himalayas, which are the highest mountain range in the world, is located along here, including that of Mount Everest. You have Nepal with its capital of Kathmandu. And that is where you'll find, obviously, the greatest mountain on Earth, but not the farthest point from the center of the Earth. The second highest mountains, which is right here, K2. The K gives its mountain range, and the 2 of it indicates it's the second highest, and it's the Karakoram Mountains. So remember that, the Karakoram Mountains. That will then, I think, I will pause. I will make it another video because I still have half of the continent to talk about, and I don't want the video to be too overwhelmingly long, but please, 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 so much stuff I'm leaving out, like Pakistan and its various prime ministers, and its flooding just in the past year, and the same thing with India, and the same thing with Iran, and it's recent within the last year riots, and there's just so much stuff. But just get lost in the Wikipedia page. First thing you do, learn the capital. Make yourself some flashcards, learn the capital, and then systematically, but it has to be systematically, and you've got to do it on a daily, if not every other day basis. So good luck, keep studying, and I'll come up with soon installment number 2.